The morning sun beat down on the Marine training facility in Southern California, casting long shadows across the shooting range. Dust hung in the air like a thin veil, disturbed by the occasional desert breeze that swept through the compound. The sound of rifle fire echoed across the valley, a steady rhythm that had become as familiar as breathing to the men stationed there. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison stood behind the firing line, arms crossed, watching the newest batch of Marines take their positions. At 32, he had seen enough combat deployments to fill a career twice over. His weathered face and steady gaze spoke of someone who had earned his stripes the hard way. The Marines under his watch respected him, even if they sometimes found his methods demanding. The range was busy that day. 20 Marines were cycling through their quarterly qualifications, and Morrison had his work cut out for him. He walked the line, checking stances, offering corrections, occasionally barking orders when someone's form slipped. This was routine, the kind of day that blended into all the others on base. Then she arrived. Corporal Sarah Chen stepped onto the range with her rifle case slung over her shoulder. She was smaller than most of the men around her, standing at 5'4", with her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was crisp, her boots polished to a mere shine. She moved with quiet confidence, the kind that came from someone who knew exactly what they were doing but saw no need to announce it. Morrison noticed her immediately, not because she stood out in any particular way, but because she was new to his range. He had a mental catalog of every Marine who trained here regularly, and she was not one of them. He watched as she found an empty station and began unpacking her equipment. What caught his attention next was the scope. As Chen assembled her rifle, Morrison's eyes narrowed on the targeting scope she was mounting. It was unlike anything he had seen on the range before. Custom-built, with modifications that seemed excessive for standard Marine qualifications. The scope itself was larger than regulation issue, with additional adjustment turrets and what appeared to be a built-in ranging system that went beyond normal specifications. Morrison was not the only one who noticed. Sergeant Kyle Brennan, a loudmouth from 2nd Battalion, had been watching too. Brennan was the kind of Marine who had just enough skill to be confident but not enough wisdom to be humble. He had a reputation for talking big, especially when there was an audience around to hear it. "Check out the fancy hardware," Brennan called out, loud enough for half the range to hear. He nudged the Marine next to him, a young lance corporal who grinned on cue. "Looks like someone ordered their scope from a sci-fi movie." A few chuckles rippled through the nearby shooters. Chen did not look up. She continued adjusting her rifle with careful, measured movements, her face expressionless. Morrison should have shut it down then. In hindsight, he would wish he had, but something made him curious. He wanted to see how the corporal would handle herself, whether she would respond to the provocation or simply let her shooting do the talking. "That thing got a built-in coffee maker too?" Brennan continued, encouraged by the laughter. "Maybe a GPS to help you find the target?" More laughs. Even Morrison felt a slight smirk tug at the corner of his mouth, though he kept his face neutral. The scope did look excessive. In his experience, Marines who showed up with over-customized gear were usually compensating for something. The best shooters he knew kept things simple. Chen finished mounting the scope and ran a final check on her rifle. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, testing the bolt action, checking the magazine seating, adjusting the cheek rest. Everything about her movements spoke of routine, of a process she had done thousands of times. "You planning to shoot that thing or just look at it?" Brennan pressed. He was fully committed now, playing to his audience. "Because if you need help figuring out which end the bullets come out of, I could show you." That got a bigger laugh. Even some of the Marines who had not been paying attention turned to look. Chen finally glanced up, her dark eyes settling on Brennan for just a moment. Her expression remained neutral, unreadable. Then she looked away, turning her attention back to her rifle. "Strong silent type," Brennan said to his buddy. "Probably needs all that fancy tech because she can't shoot straight." Morrison decided it was time to intervene. He started toward Chen's station, ready to get things back on track. Before he could speak, Chen stood and walked to the firing line. She took her position, settling into a prone stance with smooth, economical movements. The rifle came up naturally, fitting into her shoulder like it belonged there. "All right, let's see what you've got, Corporal," Morrison said, his tone professional. Standard targets, 200 yards. Take your time. Chen nodded once. She pressed her eye to the scope, her breathing settling into the slow, controlled rhythm of a trained marksman. The range fell quiet around her station, the kind of silence that comes when people are watching something they expect to be entertaining. Brennan stood behind her at a safe distance, arms crossed, a smirk still playing on his face. "Bet you $5 she misses the whole target," he muttered to the Marine beside him. Not quite quiet enough. Morrison shot him a warning glance, but said nothing. He wanted to see this play out. Chen's finger found the trigger. Her body went still, that perfect moment of calm before the shot. Then she fired. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range. Downrange, the target jerked as the round struck home. Morrison raised his binoculars, checking the hit. Center mass, maybe an inch from dead center. A solid shot by any standard. Chen worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. Another hit, this one even closer to center. She continued the sequence, firing with mechanical precision. 5 rounds, 5 hits, all grouped within a 2-inch circle at the target's center. Morrison lowered his binoculars, his eyebrows raised slightly. That was good shooting, better than good. That was expert level. He glanced at Chen, who was calmly reloading her magazine, her expression unchanged. "Not bad," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Let's see it again at 300. The targets were moved back. Chen adjusted her scope with quick, confident movements, making calculations that Morrison could not quite follow. She settled back into position and repeated the exercise. Again, 5 rounds, 5 hits, grouped tight. By now, more Marines had stopped what they were doing to watch. Word was spreading that something interesting was happening at Station 7. Even Brennan had gone quiet, though the smirk had not entirely left his face. 400 yards, Morrison ordered, testing her now. 400 yards was where things got challenging. Wind became a serious factor. The arc of the bullet required precise calculations. Most Marines could hit a target at that distance, but tight groupings were another matter entirely. Chen made her adjustments. Morrison noticed she spent more time on this one, studying the wind flags scattered along the range, making tiny corrections to her scope settings. When she fired, the process was the same as before. 5 rounds, methodical and calm. Morrison checked the target through his binoculars. His eyes widened slightly. All 5 rounds had struck within a 3-inch circle, compensating perfectly for the wind drift. That was not just good shooting, that was exceptional. "Where did you train, Corporal?" Morrison asked, genuine curiosity in his voice now. "Quantico, Staff Sergeant," Chen replied simply. "Standard Scout Sniper Course." Morrison nodded slowly. That explained some of it. The Scout Sniper School was notoriously difficult, with a washout rate above 50%. If she had graduated from there, she had earned her place. But even Scout snipers did not typically shoot like this in casual qualifications. "Let's see 500, Morrison said. 500 yards was pushing the limits for the standard M4 platform most Marines used. Chen's rifle was different though, Morrison noticed now. It was a precision build, chambered in a larger caliber, designed for exactly this kind of long-range work. "That rifle spec?" Brennan called out, his voice carrying a slight edge now. The smirk was gone. "Looks custom." "It is custom," Chen said, not looking back at him. "Built to my specifications." "Course it is," Brennan muttered. "Probably costs more than my car." Chen did not respond. She was already in position, making her calculations. Morrison watched her work, impressed despite himself by the level of care she put into each adjustment. This was someone who understood their equipment intimately, who had spent countless hours learning every quirk and capability of their weapon system. The first shot at 500 yards took longer. Chen waited, watching the wind, letting her breathing settle completely. When she fired, Morrison was already watching through his binoculars. The round struck just left of center, a solid hit, but not perfect. Chen made a tiny adjustment to her scope and fired again, this time dead center. The remaining 3 rounds followed, each one finding the mark with consistent precision. A small crowd had gathered now. 20 Marines stood watching, some with arms crossed, others pointing and discussing what they were seeing. This kind of shooting was rare, even on a military range where skilled marksmen were common. Morrison walked over to Chen as she cleared her rifle. "That's some impressive shooting, Corporal. That scope giving you ranging data?" "Among other things," Chen said, securing her rifle. "It has integrated ballistic calculations, wind reading, even atmospheric pressure compensation. I designed most of the modifications myself." "You designed it?" Morrison could not hide his surprise. "I have a background in optical engineering," Chen explained. "Before I enlisted, I worked for a defense contractor developing targeting systems. When I went through Scout Sniper School, I realized I could improve on the standard issue scopes, so I did." Morrison was reassessing everything he had assumed about the corporal. This was not some boot showing off expensive gear. This was a legitimate expert, someone who understood the science behind marksmanship at a level few Marines ever reached. "Why the custom build?" Morrison asked. "Standard issue not good enough?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Standard issue is fine for most applications, but I like to push the limits of what's possible. The scope you see is the result of 3 years of refinement. It gives me capabilities most shooters don't have access to." "Capabilities like what?" "Rapid target acquisition at extended ranges, automatic wind compensation, integration with spotting systems. It turns a good shooter into a precision instrument." She paused, then added, "Though the shooter still has to know what they're doing. The technology only enhances capability. It doesn't create it." Morrison nodded, appreciating the humility in that statement. He had seen too many Marines who thought expensive gear would make them better shooters. Chen clearly understood that skill came first, equipment second. Behind them, Brennan was talking with his group, his voice lower now, but still audible. "Bet she couldn't do that without all that tech. Put her on a standard scope and she'd be average like everyone else." Chen heard it. Morrison saw her jaw tighten slightly, the first crack in her professional demeanor. She turned to face Brennan directly. "You want to test that theory, Sergeant?" Her voice was calm but carried across the range clearly. Brennan looked up, caught off guard. "What? You think the scope is doing the work? Give me your rifle. Standard issue scope, no modifications, same targets." The range went dead silent. Every eye was on Brennan now, waiting to see if he would back down or accept the challenge. Morrison should have stopped it. This was turning into a pissing contest, and that was never good for unit cohesion. But he found himself curious about what would happen. Brennan's face flushed slightly. He had talked himself into a corner and knew it. If he backed down now, he would lose face in front of everyone. If he accepted and Chen made him look foolish, the result would be worse. "Yeah, sure," Brennan said, trying to sound casual. He unslung his rifle and walked it over to Chen. "Let's see what you can do with basic gear." Chen took the rifle, checking it over with professional efficiency. It was a standard M4, nothing special, with a regulation scope that had seen better days. The kind of rifle that thousands of Marines qualified with every year. Good enough for government work, as the saying went, but a far cry from her custom build. "Same distance?" Chen asked Morrison. 500 yards? Morrison hesitated. This had gone beyond a simple qualification exercise. But he also recognized that something important was happening here. Chen was making a point, one that needed to be made. Sometimes Marines needed to be reminded that skill mattered more than equipment, that fancy gear was no substitute for fundamentals. 500 yards, Morrison confirmed. 5 rounds. We'll judge the grouping. Chen took position with Brennan's rifle. Morrison watched her carefully. She spent more time on the setup this time, adjusting the cheek rest, testing the trigger pull, getting familiar with the weapon. It was clear this rifle was nowhere near the quality of her own, but she adapted without complaint. The first shot surprised everyone. Despite the inferior equipment, the round struck within inches of the target center. Chen worked the bolt smoothly, chambered the next round, and fired again. Another hit, nearly as good as the first. By the 5th shot, Morrison was shaking his head in disbelief. The grouping was not as tight as what she had achieved with her own rifle, but it was still exceptional. Better than 95% of the Marines on that range could have managed. Better than anything Brennan had ever shot. When Chen stood and cleared the rifle, handing it back to Brennan, the silence on the range was absolute. Brennan took his weapon without a word, his face red, his earlier smirk completely gone. "The scope helps," Chen said quietly, addressing the crowd now. "But it's not doing the shooting. That comes from training, from understanding ballistics, from practice. The technology makes good shooters better. It doesn't make bad shooters good." Morrison found himself nodding. It was a lesson he had tried to teach countless times, but rarely had he seen it demonstrated so clearly. "All right, show's over," Morrison called out to the gathered Marines. "Everyone back to your stations. We've still got qualifications to complete." The crowd dispersed slowly, many of them casting backward glances at Chen as they returned to their positions. The atmosphere on the range had shifted. Where there had been mockery and skepticism before, there was now a grudging respect, at least from most of the Marines present. Chen returned to her station and began packing her equipment. Morrison walked over, watching her work. "That was quite a demonstration, Corporal," he said. "Though I'm not sure it was necessary to embarrass Sergeant Brennan quite so thoroughly." Chen looked up at him, her expression serious. "With respect, Staff Sergeant," he embarrassed himself. "I just gave him the opportunity to learn from it." Morrison could not argue with that. "Fair enough. Though I expect you've made some enemies today, Brennan's not the type to forget being shown up." "I can handle Sergeant Brennan," Chen said simply. "I've dealt with worse." "I believe you," Morrison said. He paused, then asked, "What brings you to this range anyway? Scout snipers usually train at their own facilities." "I'm here temporarily," Chen explained. "Attached to an evaluation program, I'm supposed to be testing some new targeting systems for potential Marine Corps adoption. This range was recommended as a good place to conduct field tests." "Testing systems you designed yourself?" "Some of them, yes. The Marine Corps is interested in upgrading their designated marksman programs. I'm one of several contractors and serving members providing input on what's possible with current technology." That made sense. The military was always looking for ways to give their shooters an edge, and having someone who both understood the technology and could actually shoot at an expert level would be invaluable for that kind of evaluation work. "How long are you here for?" Morrison asked. "Another week? Maybe 2. Depends on how the testing goes." Morrison nodded. "Well, you're welcome on my range anytime, Corporal. Just maybe try to avoid humiliating my Marines too badly. It's hard on morale." A slight smile crossed Chen's face, the first break in her professional demeanor Morrison had seen. "I'll do my best, Staff Sergeant." As Morrison walked away, he found himself impressed despite the day's drama. Chen was the real deal, someone who had earned her expertise through hard work and dedication. The custom scope was not a crutch, but a tool in the hands of a master craftsman. He glanced back to see her finishing her pack-up, moving with the same careful efficiency she brought to everything. Morrison made a mental note to keep an eye on her while she was on base. Something told him that today's demonstration was just the beginning of an interesting 2 weeks. The following days on the base settled into an uneasy rhythm. Word of Chen's shooting demonstration had spread through the barracks like wildfire, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. Some Marines claimed she had hit targets at 1,000 yards with iron sights. Others swore she had made impossible shots in heavy wind that would have defeated any other shooter. The truth was impressive enough without embellishment, but truth rarely stopped a good barracks story. Chen continued her evaluation work, appearing on the range each morning with different equipment configurations. Sometimes she worked alone, methodically testing various scope settings and recording data in a worn notebook. Other times she was accompanied by civilian contractors in polo shirts and khakis, defense industry types who spoke in technical jargon and took endless photographs of her shooting. Morrison watched her from a distance, careful not to interfere with her work but curious about what she was accomplishing. The evaluation she was conducting seemed thorough, almost obsessive in its attention to detail. Every variable was controlled, every shot documented, every equipment change carefully logged. On the 3rd day after the incident with Brennan, Morrison was running a training exercise for a squad of younger Marines when he noticed a group gathering near Chen's station. His gut tightened. He recognized the body language, the way they were standing in a loose semicircle, the posture of men looking for confrontation. Brennan was at the center of the group. Morrison started walking over, his pace measured but purposeful. As he got closer, He could hear Brennan's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. "Must be nice having the fancy toys," Brennan was saying. "Some of us have to make do with what the Corps issues us. Don't get special treatment just because we're buddies with the brass." Chen was kneeling beside her equipment case, organizing her gear. She did not look up at Brennan's comment, but Morrison saw her hands pause briefly before continuing their work. "I'm just saying," Brennan continued, encouraged by his audience. "It's easy to look good when you've got every advantage. Put any of us in that situation and we'd shoot just as well." "That's enough, Sergeant," Morrison said as he approached. His tone was level but carried clear authority. "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" Brennan turned, his expression flashing briefly with irritation before settling into professional neutrality. "Just making conversation, Staff Sergeant. No harm meant." "Then go make conversation somewhere else. The corporal has work to do." For a moment, Morrison thought Brennan might push back. The sergeant's jaw worked like he was chewing on a response. Then he nodded curtly and turned away, his group following. Morrison waited until they were out of earshot before speaking to Chen. "You all right, Corporal?" "I'm fine, Staff Sergeant," Chen replied, still organizing her equipment. "Not the first time I've dealt with that kind of attitude." "I imagine not," Morrison said. He hesitated, then asked, "Does it bother you? The comments, I mean." Chen finally looked up at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "It used to. When I first enlisted, I spent a lot of energy trying to prove myself, trying to make people see me as just another Marine. Eventually, I realized that some people will never see past their own prejudices, so now I just do my job to the best of my ability and let the results speak for themselves." Morrison nodded, appreciating the wisdom in that approach. He had known Marines who let the critics get under their skin, who spent more energy fighting perception battles than improving their skills. Chen had moved past that, focusing on what she could control. "For what it's worth," Morrison said, "you've earned respect from most of the Marines here. Brennan's just got a bruised ego. He'll get over it eventually." "Or he won't," Chen said with a slight shrug. "Either way, it's his problem, not mine." Morrison smiled at that. He was starting to genuinely like the corporal. There was something refreshing about her straightforward attitude, her refusal to get drawn into drama. "What are you working on today?" he asked, gesturing to her equipment. "Low-light optics," Chen explained, testing how different scope configurations perform in decreasing light conditions. The Marine Corps wants data on whether enhanced light-gathering capabilities justify the cost increase over standard night vision systems. "Sounds like important work." "It could be. If we can give designated marksmen better tools for transitional light conditions, dusk and dawn operations become significantly more effective. Those are often the times when enemy forces are most active, so having clear targeting capability matters." Morrison listened as Chen explained her testing protocols, impressed by the depth of her knowledge. She was not just a good shooter, she understood the broader tactical implications of the technology she was evaluating. That kind of strategic thinking was rare, especially in junior Marines. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Morrison turned to see a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulling into the range parking area. That was unusual. Civilian vehicles rarely came onto the range, and certainly not in convoy formation. "You expecting visitors?" Morrison asked Chen. "No," she replied, but something in her tone suggested she had an idea what this might be about. The SUVs parked and their doors opened. A group of men emerged, and Morrison immediately recognized them as military despite their civilian clothes. There was something about the way they moved, the way they automatically scanned their surroundings, that marked them as operators. His suspicion was confirmed when he noticed the subtle bulges under their jackets where sidearms were holstered. One man stood out from the rest. He was tall, probably 6'2", with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent in hard places. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who had operated at the highest levels and had nothing left to prove. As he walked across the range toward them, Morrison noticed the way Chen's posture changed slightly, becoming more formal. "Commander," Chen said as the man approached, her tone respectful. "Corporal Chen," the man replied with a slight nod. His voice was deep and measured, carrying an undertone of authority that went beyond rank. Then he turned to Morrison, extending his hand. "Staff Sergeant." I'm Commander Hale, Naval Special Warfare. Morrison shook his hand, recognizing the designation immediately. Naval Special Warfare meant SEAL teams. His mind raced, trying to understand what a SEAL commander was doing on his range, looking for Chen. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, sir. I run this range. Good to meet you, Staff Sergeant. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. Just standard training, sir. Nothing that can't wait. What brings you out here? Hale glanced at Chen before responding. I'm here to observe Corporal Chen's evaluation work. Her reports have caught the attention of some people in Special Operations Command. We wanted to see firsthand what she's accomplishing. Morrison looked at Chen, who kept her expression carefully neutral. There was clearly more to this story than she had shared, but she was not offering any additional information. The corporal has been doing excellent work, Morrison said carefully. Her technical knowledge and shooting skills are both impressive. So I've heard, Hale said. There was something in his tone that suggested he had heard more than just second-hand reports. In fact, I've been hearing quite a bit about what happened here a few days ago. Something about a demonstration with a borrowed rifle? Morrison felt his stomach tighten slightly. Of course word had traveled. Nothing stayed secret on a military base for long. He wondered how much trouble Chen might be in for showing up another Marine so publicly. That was my fault, sir, Morrison began, ready to take responsibility for not shutting down the situation sooner. I should have intervened before things escalated. Hale held up a hand, stopping him. Relax, Staff Sergeant. I'm not here to assign blame. Actually, that incident is part of why I wanted to meet the corporal in person. He turned to Chen. I read your after-action report. You downplayed what happened considerably. I saw no reason to make a big deal of it, sir, Chen replied. It was a minor incident blown out of proportion. Maybe, Hale said. Or maybe it revealed something important about how your work is being perceived at the ground level. That's valuable information. Morrison was lost now, trying to piece together what was happening. Hale noticed his confusion and seemed to take pity on him. Let me provide some context, Staff Sergeant, Hale said. Corporal Chen is not just here to evaluate equipment. She's part of a pilot program we've been running for the past year, identifying Marines with exceptional skills who might be candidates for cross-training with special operations units. The equipment evaluation is real, but it's also a cover for us to observe her in a standard Marine Corps environment, see how she handles herself outside of controlled testing situations. The pieces started falling into place for Morrison. So you've been watching her the whole time she's been here? Not directly, Hale said. We rely on reports from base personnel. Informal observations, that kind of thing. But yes, we've been monitoring her progress. And based on everything we've seen, including how she handled herself during that incident with your sergeant, we're impressed. Chen remained silent during this exchange, her face revealing nothing. Morrison wondered if she had known all along that she was being evaluated for more than just equipment testing. What kind of cross-training are we talking about, sir? Morrison asked. That depends on a lot of factors, Hale said. But potentially, integration with SEAL sniper elements, maritime operations, counter-terrorism, high-value target situations. Operations where having a precision marksman with Chen's level of skill could be decisive. Morrison's eyebrows rose. SEALs were notoriously selective about who they worked with. The idea that they were seriously considering integrating a Marine corporal into their operations spoke volumes about how highly they regarded her abilities. With all due respect, sir, Morrison said carefully, that seems like a significant departure from normal procedures. Marines and SEALs don't usually mix operationally. You're right, Hale acknowledged. It is unusual, but we're living in unusual times. The nature of warfare is changing. The operations we're conducting require capabilities that cross traditional service boundaries. If someone has the skills we need, we're increasingly willing to look past conventional barriers. He turned back to Chen. Which brings me to why I'm here today. I wanted to observe your testing personally, see your methods firsthand. I've read your technical reports, but I want to understand how you think, how you approach problems. Would you mind giving us a demonstration? Of course, sir, Chen said. What would you like to see? Surprise me, Hale said with a slight smile. Show me something that demonstrates why the Marine Corps should invest in the technology you're evaluating. Chen nodded, her mind clearly already working through possibilities. Morrison watched as she pulled out her equipment, this time assembling not just her rifle but a tablet computer and what looked like a small weather station. "If you want to see the real advantage of integrated targeting systems," Chen said as she worked, "we need to push the limits." "Staff Sergeant Morrison, could I use the 1,000-yard range?" Morrison blinked. The 1,000-yard range was rarely used except for specialized training. It was challenging enough that most Marines never attempted it. "You sure about that, Corporal?" Morrison asked. "Yes, Staff Sergeant. That's where the technology really makes a difference." Morrison led the group down to the extended range. The targets at 1,000 yards looked impossibly small, barely visible dots in the distance. The wind was picking up too, adding another layer of difficulty. Chen set up her equipment with methodical care. The tablet connected wirelessly to her scope, displaying real-time data about wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, even barometric pressure. Morrison had never seen anything like it. Traditional long-range shooting requires the marksman to calculate all these variables manually, Chen explained as she worked, addressing the group now. Wind drift, bullet drop, the Coriolis effect at extreme ranges. It takes years of experience to get good at making those calculations under pressure. The system I'm testing automates much of that process, feeding the data directly to the scope. The shooter still needs to make the final adjustments and take the shot, but they're working with better information. She settled into position behind her rifle. The tablet showed a targeting solution, complex calculations that meant nothing to Morrison, but apparently told Chen everything she needed to know. The first shot surprised everyone. At 1,000 yards, most shooters would be happy just to hit the target board, let alone the actual bullseye. Chen's round struck within inches of center. Hale watched through high-powered binoculars, saying nothing. Chen fired 4 more rounds, each one grouping tightly with the others. When she finished, the grouping could have been covered by a coffee cup. At 1,000 yards, in wind, that was extraordinary shooting by any standard. "How much of that was the system versus your skill?" Hale asked. "Honest answer, sir? About 50-50. The system gives me data I would otherwise have to estimate. That improves my first round hit probability significantly. But I still need to read the conditions, make judgment calls about variables the computer can't measure perfectly, and execute the fundamentals correctly. A bad shooter with this system would still be a bad shooter. But a good shooter becomes significantly more effective." Hale nodded slowly, processing this. "And the cost of this system? What are we talking about?" "The complete system, as configured here, runs about $15,000. That's expensive compared to standard issue, but cheap compared to the cost of training a sniper to achieve the same results without it. Plus, the failure rate in sniper training is high. This system could help more Marines achieve proficiency faster, which ultimately saves money." "Interesting," Hale said. He exchanged glances with the other SEALs who had accompanied him. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Morrison stood back, feeling somewhat out of his depth. This conversation had moved beyond his expertise, into realms of special operations, planning and budgeting that he rarely encountered. "Corporal Chen," Hale said finally, "I've seen enough. Your technical work is impressive, as are your skills. I'd like to invite you to visit our training facility at Coronado. There are some people I want you to meet, some scenarios I'd like to see you work through. Are you interested?" Chen did not hesitate. "Yes, sir." "Good. I'll arrange the details through your chain of command. Plan on 2 weeks, starting next month. Bring your equipment. We'll run you through some exercises, see how your systems perform in scenarios that more closely match our operational requirements." "I'll be ready, sir." Hale turned to Morrison. "Staff Sergeant, thank you for accommodating us today. Your range is well run. Your Marines are professional. That's appreciated." "Thank you, sir," Morrison replied, still processing everything he had just witnessed. As Hale and his team walked back to their vehicles, Morrison found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about Chen. She was not just a skilled Marine doing an evaluation project. She was potentially on track to become something much more significant, someone who might operate at levels few Marines ever reached. "You could have mentioned you were being looked at by Special Operations," Morrison said to Chen once they were alone. "I wasn't sure it would amount to anything," Chen replied, packing her equipment. "I didn't want to make assumptions." "Fair enough. But for the record, if they offer you a position, you should take it. You're too skilled to spend your career doing standard qualifications on ranges like this." Chen looked at him, something like gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That means a lot coming from you." As she finished packing and headed back to her vehicle, Morrison stood alone on the range, watching the distant targets flutter in the wind. He thought about Brennan's mocking comments from a few days ago, about the fancy scope and the assumptions about Chen's abilities. Brennan had no idea who he had been mocking. None of them had. They had seen a small female corporal with expensive equipment and made assumptions. They had missed the fact that they were dealing with someone operating at an entirely different level, someone who had already caught the attention of the most elite units in the military. Morrison smiled to himself. There was a lesson in that, one he planned to share with his Marines. Never judge someone by appearances. Never assume that equipment means incompetence. And never, ever underestimate someone just because they don't fit your preconceptions. That evening, in the barracks, Morrison heard the usual chatter and gossip that filled the downtime between training exercises. Someone mentioned Chen, and Morrison heard Brennan's voice cutting through the conversation. "I don't care who showed up to watch her shoot," Brennan was saying. "Probably just some desk jockeys from procurement. Doesn't change the fact that she's got every advantage and still needs to prove herself in real situations." Morrison almost intervened, almost walked over and set the record straight about who exactly had come to observe Chen. But he stopped himself. Brennan would find out eventually, probably when Chen disappeared to Coronado for 2 weeks and word got out about what she was doing there. Sometimes the best lessons were the ones people learned on their own, when reality contradicted their assumptions so thoroughly that they had no choice but to reconsider their views. Brennan was heading for that lesson. Morrison decided to let him learn it the hard way. The weeks following Commander Hale's visit passed quickly for Chen. Her equipment evaluation work continued, but now there was an added weight to everything she did. She knew that eyes were watching, assessing not just her technical findings, but her potential for something greater. The invitation to Coronado hung over her thoughts like a promise and a challenge combined. Morrison noticed the change in her demeanor. She became even more focused, if that was possible, spending extra hours on the range after official duties ended. He would sometimes find her there at dusk, running calculations by hand to verify what her computer systems were telling her, ensuring she understood every aspect of her equipment at a fundamental level. "You're going to burn yourself out," Morrison told her one evening, finding her still on the range as the sun set behind the mountains. "I need to be ready," Chen replied, not looking up from her notebook where she was recording data. "If I'm going to work with special operations, I can't afford any weaknesses." "You don't have weaknesses, Corporal. That's why they're interested in you." "Everyone has weaknesses, Staff Sergeant. The question is whether you know what they are and are working to fix them." Morrison could not argue with that logic. He watched her for a moment longer, then left her to her work. Some people were driven by an internal standard that no external authority could match. Chen was clearly one of those people. Word about Chen's upcoming trip to Coronado eventually leaked through the base grapevine, as such things always did. The story morphed and evolved with each retelling. Some said she was being recruited by the SEALs themselves. Others claimed she was going to train their snipers. A particularly ambitious rumor suggested she was being tapped for a classified program that combined Marines and Special Forces into a new hybrid unit. The truth was probably simpler, Morrison suspected. They wanted to evaluate her in more realistic scenarios, see if her skills translated from controlled range conditions to the chaos of simulated operations. It was one thing to shoot perfectly at static targets. It was another entirely to perform under pressure, with variables beyond your control, with consequences for failure. Brennan heard the rumors too. Morrison watched the sergeant's reaction carefully, curious if the news would change his attitude. For a few days, Brennan said nothing, maintaining his distance from Chen and keeping his opinions to himself. Morrison thought perhaps the message had finally gotten through, that Brennan had realized he was out of his depth in criticizing someone who was operating at a level he could not comprehend. Then came the training exercise that changed everything. The base commander had ordered a combined arms drill, bringing together multiple units for a complex scenario that would test coordination and communication. It was the kind of large-scale exercise that everyone complained about, but that served important purposes in identifying gaps in unit readiness. The scenario was designed to simulate a hostage rescue situation. A building on the far end of the base had been designated as the target structure. Intelligence reports, fictional but detailed, indicated that hostile forces were holding 2 civilian contractors inside. Multiple Marine units would coordinate to assault the building, while a designated marksman team provided overwatch and eliminated key threats. Morrison was assigned as one of the range safety officers for the exercise, ensuring that the use of simulated ammunition and training weapons proceeded safely. Chen had been pulled into the exercise as well, assigned to the marksman overwatch team. Her role was to provide precision fire support during the assault phase, taking out designated targets that represented enemy snipers and crew-served weapons. The Overwatch team consisted of 3 shooters. Chen was paired with a senior lance corporal named Torres, a solid marksman who had deployed twice and knew his job. The 3rd position was filled by Brennan, who had lobbied hard to be included in the exercise, apparently seeing it as an opportunity to prove himself against Chen. Morrison saw the roster and felt a knot form in his stomach. Putting Brennan and Chen together in a high-pressure exercise seemed like asking for trouble, but he had no authority to change the assignments, so he kept his concerns to himself and hoped professionalism would win out over ego. The exercise began at dawn. The assault force moved into position while the Overwatch team established themselves on a rooftop 600 yards from the target building. Morrison watched through binoculars from a safe observation point, tracking the exercise's progress. The Overwatch position gave the marksmen a clear line of sight to the target structure. Their job was to identify and eliminate specific threats before the assault team made their approach. Training targets had been positioned in windows and on the roof of the target building, representing enemy fighters that needed to be neutralized. Through his radio, Morrison could hear the communication between the assault commander and the Overwatch team. The assault commander was a captain named Reyes, a by-the-book officer who ran tight operations. Overwatch. Assault, 6. We are approaching phase line Charlie. Request target assessment. Torres responded, his voice calm and professional. Assault 6. Overwatch. We have eyes on 5 hostile positions. 3 in second-floor windows, 2 on the roof. Preparing to engage on your mark. Stand by, Overwatch. We need those roof positions cleared before we begin our approach. Crew-served weapon threat assessed as high. Understood. Assault 6. Engaging roof positions now. Morrison watched as the Overwatch team went to work. Chen and Torres took the shots, their rifles cracking in careful sequence. The training targets on the roof flipped backward, indicating successful hits. It was smooth, professional work. Roof clear. Assault 6. Torres reported. Copy that, Overwatch. Stand by for window targets. This was where things got more complicated. The window positions required more precise shooting, as they were partially concealed and positioned at angles that made clean hits difficult. Additionally, the exercise controllers had added a wrinkle by placing non-combatant targets in some windows, requiring the marksmen to discriminate between threats and civilians. Overwatch. Assault 6. We need those windows clear before we can proceed. Be advised, intelligence indicates possible civilian presence. Confirm targets before engaging. Morrison heard Brennan's voice come over the radio, the first time he had spoken during the exercise. Assault 6. This is Overwatch 3. I have a clear shot on the leftmost window position. Ready to engage. There was a pause. Torres came back on the radio. Overwatch 3. Hold your fire. That position is showing non-combatant signals. Yellow shirt, no visible weapon. Negative. Overwatch 1, Brennan replied, tension creeping into his voice. I'm seeing tactical gear and what looks like a weapon shadow. That's a hostile. Chen's voice cut in, calm and measured. Overwatch 3, Overwatch 2. I have magnification on that position. Civilian confirmed. Yellow shirt, no weapon, hands visible. Do not engage. Morrison felt his jaw tighten. He could see where this was heading. Brennan was about to make a mistake, and the question was whether his ego would prevent him from accepting correction. Overwatch 2? Brennan's voice was sharp now. I've been doing this job for 5 years. I know what I'm seeing. That's a threat. Overwatch 3. Overwatch 2. My optics are superior.